the objective today is going to be primarily to focus on the Power Query side of things. So we'll be doing completely demos for today's session. And the objective today will be to focus purely on the ETL side of things, right? So we won't be getting into reporting as of now. And just to lay down the agenda and the landscape for so we'll be doing reporting, we'll be doing ETL right now. ETL would basically be the Power Query or the query editor layer. Hope all of you remember the Power Query, which is the ETL part. So that is what we're going to be focusing on. So our focus is going to be on getting data, transforming our data, and essentially ensuring that our data is in the right shape. That's going to be the primary focus for today's session and the next session. And after that, we're going to be getting into reporting. We're going to be exploring how to create different charts, what kind of interactivity to set, what are the best charting best practices. And finally, we're going to be looking at some advanced topics like how to model your data, how to write DAX expressions and stuff. So that's going to be the basic agenda of how we're going to be proceed. Okay, I think there are 3 entries that are created for certain participants. Lisette, hi, how are you there? And all our demos going forward on the query editor, as I talked about, the entire transformation layer that I'm going to be talking about today is going to be focused on all of you importing this data set into Power BI. So ensure that all of you are doing this parallelly with me. Now the navigator interface will come up. Hope all of you remember the navigator interface is useful for getting our sheets, importing whatever sheets we want to import. So I'll import my orders, people, and returns. So I'll import 3 sheets. And remember, whenever you import sheets in an Excel file or tables from a database or probably something else, let's say web data, whatever you import they become queries in the query editor. Okay, so query editor is a Power Query layer where essentially we perform ETL. Okay, so I'm going to import these 3 sheets. And remember, if you're trying to import it, you're going to click on edit. What will happen if I click on load? So there are 2 options, right? So we can click on load or we can click on edit. What do you think will happen if I click on load? And what do you think will happen if I click on edit? Edit obviously would mean that we're going to open up the edit queries, right? So the query editor. If I click on edit, as you can see, what happens is I will be opening up the query editor. It will process my queries and it will basically open up the query editor where those 3 queries, as in those 3 worksheets, will be displayed. But my question, the other question was basically what will happen if I had clicked on load. So in the Power Pivot data model, what do? After we import our data, after we have done all the requisite transformations, we load our data to the Power Pivot data model, right? So first you get your data, import your data in Power Query, then you proceed with all your transformations. And remember, this is the transformation layer, right? Whatever you're looking at right now, this is the transformation layer. This is where all of you are going to do your transformations. And finally, what are you going to do? You're going to load your data over to the Power Pivot data model, right? That is the close and apply step. So if I had directly loaded from there, what would have happened? So for instance, if I go to orders and let's say, as an example, so we understood what are queries, we understood what are steps. Also steps are nothing but essentially transformations you're applying to your queries, right? So let's say as an example, I'm going to remove all these columns here. Okay, I can just select on it. I can just go ahead and remove all these columns. As an example, I'm just taking. And let me take only the last 4 columns here as an example. I can remove all these columns, and obviously if I remove these columns, you can see a removed column step has been applied. And once I've done that, I can go ahead and say close and apply. And the moment I do that, what happens is it closes the query editor and the data along with essentially along with all these changes applied. And what are the changes applied? Essentially, I have transformed my data, right? So initially I had like 20 odd columns. And now my data has been transformed to reflect only 4 columns. So effectively, I have transformed my data, right? So what do I need to do now? Now that I have transformed my data, I will head over to this option and say close and apply. And what this will do is, this will essentially load all my changes, or in other words, it will basically load my data to my data model. As you can see, creating the model, creating connection in model, and you can see loading data to model. Okay, this is the key. Okay, this is loading data to model. And finally, you can see how the data is getting loaded to your model. Okay, so the idea, hope it's clear to all of you. So if I directly clicked on load there, what would have happened is my data would have got loaded, but without me applying any kind of ETL transformations. Essentially, it will be just like saying I take data, data right from the source, or raw data from my source, and directly load it, without cleaning it in any way, and directly load it to my data model. And remember, data model is extremely crucial because, and this is my data model. Hope all of you remember, that's the data tab and the relationships tab in my Power BI desktop. So these are the two tabs which correspond to my data model. Here you can see the relationships. By the way, I'll come to this topic later, but you can see these three isolated tables that are available right now in my Power Pivot data model. Okay, that's my data model. And in the modeling tab, you can do a lot of other things like formulas, DAX calculations, other things you can write, which we'll be talking about later, of course. And data model is extremely crucial because whatever visualizations you'll be doing, okay, for instance, if I want to build a very simple line chart, or if I want to build a bar chart, so whatever stuff you're going to be doing on top of your data, so you're essentially going to be creating on top of your data model. Okay, so at this stage, you don't know what your source is. Okay, you don't really care about whether you took data from an Excel or or web data. You don't care. Okay, you don't care about that. So all you care about is I have this particular table, and remember this time it's no longer a query, it's a table, and I'm going to visualize my data using this table. That's all. That's all that you require to understand from this. Okay, so it's very important to create a good data model, and that's one of the reasons why uh, the ETL step or the Power Query step is so important, right? Hope the workflow is clear to all of you. We're going to be focusing more on these pieces now, and of course, if you want to head back over to your query editor layer, how will you do that? You can go to Edit Queries and just click on Edit Queries here. That is how you head back to your query editor. And remember, query editor opens as a separate window compared to your Power BI desktop. So this is Power BI desktop. Okay, this is still open. Remember, and this is where query editor opens up in a separate interface altogether. So just complete up to this point, and just forget that remove column step. So be do up to this point. We're able to see the orders table, the people table, and the returns table. Again, I tend to use the word table and query simultaneously. So this is actually a query, but it's kind of synonymous with the table. So I'll tend to use these both words simultaneously. Although it's not technically correct, but it's just how I typically like to represent it. Okay. So these are the order, people, and returns queries that all of you should be creating by now. All of you have been able to connect to a SQL Server database like SQL Server, give your server name. If you want to write a specific query, you can write in advanced options. Okay. That is where you write a SQL statement. Okay. In my case, my server name is dot. There will be a section where you will be required to enter your credentials. So obviously, that piece, I think, depending on your server, mostly you will have a SQL Server authentication. So you can absolutely, there'll be an authentication stage at there, right? So the rest of the interface will be very similar, where you can absolutely enter your database. Remember, one server can consist of multiple databases. So the other options will be very straightforward, where you can just enter you can choose your database from here and the respective tables from here directly. The same navigator interface that you will get. Okay. And remember, even if you select your tables, what will happen is, let's say if I select multiple tables from here. So for instance, if I select a fact net sales, and in your case, it will be a different table, of course. So they will also become queries in my query editor. Okay, they will become queries in my query editor. Okay, so if I just select these two and hit OK, see that I'll be importing them. And right now I have 3 queries. Now I'll basically have 5 queries, and they have been added as queries. These are the 2 tables I added from my database, remember, and they have also been added as queries in my query editor. Well, guys, import mode is a kind of scenario where you're trying to um, get all your data into Power BI. Okay, so what am I trying to say? Remember, Power BI is so whatever we are doing right now, whatever development we are doing right now in the query editor, after that, building the report. So whatever we are doing in Power BI desktop, that basically gets stored. Everything there gets stored as a .pbix file. Okay, it's a Power BI desktop file. I did show you the extension .pbix file, and the import mode concept is where you're getting all your data into your data model. So when I do an import, what I'm doing is I'm getting all my data into my data model. Okay, so you would have observed that the default option, you would have seen that in SQL Server. So whenever I'm trying to connect with a SQL Server and I'm trying to do an import, you can see the default option here is an import. Okay. And by the way, you can't choose a direct query here, and you might be wondering, okay, why can't I choose a direct query here? Because the PBIX file right now has already been configured with the imported mode. Okay, so it might sound a little confusing right now, but there are 2 kinds of modes, right? There are 2 kinds of connectivity modes, of course. Like if you want to learn more about it, of course, you can click on this sign. You can head over to the website, of course. Okay, but then there are 2 kinds of connectivity modes that you have: import mode and direct query mode. Import mode is where you're getting all your data into the data model. Okay, and again, what is data model? We talked about those 3 stages. One is the Power Query stage where you're performing the ETL. Next is the Power Pivot stage. That's your data model. So after you've done your transformations, that's when you load your data to your data model. Okay. And import mode is where the entire data gets loaded in my data model. So the actual data lives in my data model. Direct query mode is more like the live connection. It's just like a live connection where you're not loading any data to your data model. So think of the Power Pivot data model. So obviously in import mode, you're loading your data. So the actual data resides there. Whereas in the direct query mode, no actual data resides there. So only the metadata resides there. So you're only configuring what columns you have, what is the underlying structure, any calculations you're adding. So no live data is living there. So data is directly queried from your source. That's why we call it direct query. Direct query, synonymous with the name also. So you're directly querying your data from the source. Live connection is what it is. Okay, that's the concept basically. An equivalent of this in SSAs is what we call SSAs live connection also. You have something called SSAs live as well. Okay, so that is what direct query is all about. Just for the benefit of the audience, I specifically address which one is better and some of the performance enhancements here. Coming back to the other point, which I just wanted to take a parallel, it might be slightly complicated at this stage, but in line with what I was just about to discuss in a while. So here, I can't set it to direct query mode. You might be wondering why. As you can see, I can't select direct query mode. All of you can also give it a try. You can't select direct query mode. So right now, my file has been configured. Remember, your PBIX file can either be configured as a imported mode or as a direct query mode. You can't have a scenario where you're configuring your PBIX file for both the modes. You can't have, let's say, one source being configured as a direct query mode and the other source configured as a imported mode. You can't have that. So you can either have this or have this. That's the thing.
I'm sure you enjoyed learning from this video. Please like the video, and if you have any doubts regarding this video, please comment us in the comment section, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more such informative videos. Do look out for other related videos in our playlist. For more information, visit our website now. Keep learning with Intellipaat.